October 16th, 1946. Before the first light touched the rooftops of Nuremberg, 10 bodies swayed from ropes in the prison gymnasium. The final sentence had been carried out. What happened next vanished from public record. No photographs, no grave, no ashes to mourn. It was as if these men, once at the helm of the most destructive regime in history, had been erased, not only from power, but from the face of the earth itself. This was Operation Phantom, a meticulously planned act of historical suppression designed to control memory and prevent the rise of new cults of personality. For historians, students, and researchers, understanding this deliberate void is as crucial as studying what was preserved. Europe in 1945 was a graveyard of cities and ideals. The Second World War had concluded, leaving behind an unprecedented scale of destruction and human suffering. The death camps had been liberated, revealing the full horror of the Holocaust. The Third Reich lay in ruins, its leadership either dead or captured. Yet a profound question lingered like smoke over the rubble. What should be done with those who orchestrated genocide? This was not merely a matter of retribution, but of establishing a new global order. For Winston Churchill, the answer was swift, summary executions. He advocated for immediate military tribunals, believing that swift justice without the spectacle of trials would prevent any possibility of martyrdom. His concern was pragmatic: avoid creating a platform for continued Nazi ideology. But Joseph Stalin paradoxically demanded the opposite. He saw immense power in spectacle, a public trial that would not only punish the guilty but also rewrite history on Soviet terms. He envisioned a process that would highlight Soviet sacrifices and legitimize their post-war territorial gains. This ideological battle underscored the complex political landscape. In the middle stood President Harry S. Truman. He chose a third path: justice by law. This decision was revolutionary, moving beyond traditional concepts of victor's justice. Truman envisioned a tribunal, unprecedented in scale and purpose, that would establish legal precedents for future international conflicts. This was the birth of international criminal law, a monumental shift from state-centric justice to a system that held individuals accountable for crimes against humanity. For historians, this moment represents a critical juncture in the development of global governance and human rights. It laid the groundwork for institutions like the International Criminal Court. Nuremberg, once a stage for Nazi rallies and the promulgator of racist laws, now became the setting for their reckoning. The city, though heavily bombed, was chosen for its symbolic wake and its intact palace of justice. Here, 24 of the regime's highest leaders stood accused, not as symbols, but as men. They were indicted not just for waging aggressive war, but for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and conspiracy to commit these offenses. This legal framework was groundbreaking, establishing that individuals, regardless of their official position, could be held responsible for atrocities. The trials aimed to demonstrate that international law could transcend national sovereignty. In this courtroom, American prosecutors meticulously screened footage from the camps, presenting irrefutable visual evidence of the Holocaust. These films, often shot by Allied forces upon liberation, served as powerful, visceral documentation. Soviet officials praised the Red Army's heroism, using the platform to solidify their narrative of liberation and victory. The French delegation fought for post-war recognition, asserting their role as a major power despite their wartime occupation. The British, ever conscious of their global standing, guarded their empire's moral authority, emphasizing the rule of law. Each nation brought its own agenda, yet they united under the common goal of justice. Beneath the rhetoric, a deeper struggle simmered. Who would write the final chapter of this war? The trials themselves became an immense act of documentation, generating millions of pages of transcripts, witness testimonies, and captured Nazi documents. This vast archive, now housed in various national and international repositories, remains an invaluable resource for researchers. It provides unparalleled insight into the inner workings of the Nazi regime and the mechanisms of genocide. On the night of October 15, 1946, Hermann Göring, Hitler's designated successor and commander of the Luftwaffe, cheated the noose. Just hours before his scheduled execution, he ingested a cyanide capsule smuggled into his cell. This final act of defiance was a profound shock to the Allied authorities. Göring's suicide was a deliberate attempt to deny the Allies the satisfaction of executing him and to preserve a semblance of control over his own fate. It also complicated the narrative of justice, as one of the most prominent defendants escaped the gallows. The incident prompted immediate investigations into security lapses, highlighting the immense pressure on the prison staff. But for the others, the gallows waited. Shortly after 1 a.m. on October 16th, the condemned were led into the prison gymnasium, one by one. The space had been transformed for the grim purpose. Reinforced beams supported 3 gallows, constructed specifically for the executions. Acoustic insulation was installed to muffle sounds, and military lighting illuminated the scene. It was an execution chamber masquerading as justice, a stark reminder of the ultimate consequence of their crimes. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the former foreign minister, Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the OKW, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the RSHA. One after another, they faced their end. Each man reacted differently. Some prayed, seeking solace in their final moments. Others shouted defiant Nazi slogans, clinging to their ideology until the very end. Some went in silence, their faces betraying a mix of fear, resignation, or contempt. But none escaped the fate that awaited them. The meticulous recording of their final words and demeanor by witnesses became crucial historical data, offering glimpses into the minds of these architects of atrocity. Their deaths, however, were anything but clean. The gallows, designed by U.S. Army Master Sergeant John C. Woods, an executioner with prior experience, were tragically flawed. The ropes were miscalculated, and the drop lengths were too short for a swift, humane execution. Instead of quick cervical breaks, the condemned suffered slow strangulation. This horrific outcome was a profound embarrassment to the Allied powers, who had sought to conduct the executions with dignity and professionalism. Some men took over 20 minutes to die, their struggles visible to the witnesses. Julius Streicher, the notorious anti-Semitic propagandist, convulsed violently, his face contorted by asphyxiation, a grotesque spectacle. Woods, an unstable man with a psychiatric discharge from the Navy, reportedly laughed and shrugged off the botched executions. "This was the best thing I ever did," he would later tell the press, a chilling statement that revealed his detachment. His methods and demeanor raised serious questions about the competence and psychological fitness of those entrusted with carrying out the sentences. What was meant to be the solemn conclusion of justice became a grotesque postscript, casting a shadow over the moral authority of the trials. For historians, this episode highlights the messy reality of even the most righteous endeavors. It underscores the importance of documenting not just the successes, but also the failures and imperfections of historical events. The detailed accounts of these executions, though disturbing, are vital for a complete understanding of the Nuremberg process. But the most extraordinary part of the story, the deliberate act of historical erasure, had only begun. The Allied powers faced a unique dilemma. They had successfully prosecuted the Nazi leadership, but they feared the potential for martyrdom. They worried that public graves might become shrines for neo-Nazis, fostering a resurgence of the very ideology they had fought to destroy. The memory of figures like Horst Wessel, a Nazi martyr whose grave became a pilgrimage site, loomed large. The Allies understood that symbols and relics could be weaponized, transforming sites of execution into places of veneration. And so, the decision was made: no public burials, no memorials. The bodies of the condemned would not exist in any tangible, accessible form. This was a strategic decision, a calculated move to control the narrative and prevent the creation of new focal points for extremist movements. At 4 a.m. on October 17, 1946, 11 coffins, Goering's among them, despite his suicide, were loaded onto U.S. military trucks under armed guard. The secrecy was absolute. To further obscure their identities and destination, false papers were prepared, bearing fake names and invented diseases as causes of death. The convoy avoided main highways, opting instead for obscure backroads, moving stealthily through the night. Their destination, Munich's Ostfriedhof crematorium, a site chosen for its discretion and its capacity to handle the task without attracting undue attention. This meticulous planning and deliberate obfuscation created a historical void, a challenge for future researchers seeking to reconstruct the full truth. It was a cruel irony, a chilling echo of the regime's own atrocities. The same ovens that had once burned the victims of the Reich, the millions murdered in concentration and extermination camps, now received its architects. This symbolic reversal was not lost on the few Allied personnel privy to the operation. Under direct U.S. supervision, each body was cremated individually. This was a crucial detail, ensuring that no remains could be mixed or identified later. There were no prayers, no rites, no religious ceremonies. Only silence accompanied the process, a stark contrast to any traditional burial. The cremation process was overseen by a small trusted team, ensuring absolute secrecy and adherence to the plan. Their ashes were then placed in unmarked linen sacks. No urns, no markers, no identifying labels whatsoever. This was a deliberate act of dehumanization, stripping the condemned of any posthumous dignity or recognition. The goal was complete anonymity to ensure that no physical trace remained that could be venerated or even identified. Then, just before dawn on October 18th, a convoy headed for the Isar River, on a quiet, secluded stretch between Munich and Landshut, far from any populated areas. The ashes of the Third Reich's leadership were scattered into the current. The flowing water ensured that the particles would disperse, leaving no discernible trace. This final act completed the physical erasure, making any future recovery or identification impossible. There would be no graves, no flowers, no trace. The meticulousness of Operation Phantom extended beyond the bodies themselves. Even their personal belongings, uniforms, medals, rings, and any other items that might serve as relics, were systematically destroyed or melted down. This was to prevent any object from becoming a fetish or a symbol for future extremist groups. All that remained were falsified records. Cremations were listed under fictitious names, often with invented causes of death. Forged signatures adorned official documents, creating a paper trail designed to mislead and obscure. These coded lies were embedded within the official bureaucracy, making it incredibly difficult for anyone to uncover the truth through conventional means. This was more than mere secrecy. It was a sophisticated strategy of historical control. The victors of Nuremberg didn't just want to try the Nazis. They wanted to erase them from the physical landscape and, as much as possible, from the collective memory in a tangible form. The creation of this deliberate historical void presents a unique challenge for historians and researchers. It forces them to rely on fragmented testimonies, declassified documents, and careful cross-referencing to piece together the truth. The absence of physical evidence meant that the narrative had to be constructed from other sources, emphasizing the importance of oral histories and the careful analysis of official yet misleading records. This act of erasure, while understandable in its context, also raises questions about the ethics of historical manipulation, even for righteous ends. John C. Woods, the man who ended it all, the U.S. Army Master Sergeant responsible for the executions, was never honored for his role. His involvement and the controversial nature of the hangings ensured that he remained a peripheral, almost forgotten figure in the official narrative. He died 4 years later, in 1950, in a mysterious electrical accident on Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific. The circumstances of his death were never fully clarified, adding another layer of obscurity to his story. There was no ceremony, no monument, no public recognition for his unique and grim service. Only whispers and a sealed file remained, reflecting the desire to distance the Allied powers from the more unsavory aspects of the executions. Woods had carried out the world's most symbolic executions, bringing a definitive end to the lives of some of history's most reviled figures. Yet he disappeared just as completely from public memory as the men he hanged. His story serves as a poignant reminder that even those who play crucial roles in major historical events can be deliberately or inadvertently erased from the public record, becoming subjects of historical inquiry themselves. For researchers, uncovering details about figures like Woods requires delving into military archives, personal accounts, and often obscure records, piecing together a narrative from fragments. The silence surrounding the fate of these bodies endured for decades. For years, there were no civilian death certificates, no public statements detailing the disposal of the remains. Just a single, terse line in official reports. The sentence has been carried out. This deliberate lack of documentation fueled speculation and rumor. But as the years passed, questions inevitably emerged. Where were the bodies? Why was nothing recorded? What was being hidden? The absence of official information created a vacuum that conspiracy theories and persistent inquiries sought to fill. Some spoke of cover-ups, suggesting darker motives behind the secrecy. Others argued it was a matter of conscience, a necessary evil to prevent future veneration. In the absence of graves, rumors took root, and clandestine acts of remembrance sometimes occurred. There were unconfirmed reports of candles left on the Isar River, clandestine vigils held by those who still harbored sympathies for the fallen regime. For some, a calendar date in place of a tombstone became a subtle form of commemoration. It was only through the persistent efforts of historians, journalists, and researchers, sifting through declassified documents, interviewing surviving witnesses, and cross-referencing fragmented accounts, that the full story of Operation Phantom gradually came to light. This process of historical reconstruction, often relying on indirect evidence and careful inference, exemplifies the challenges and rewards of archival research. It demonstrates how even deliberately obscured events can eventually be brought into the light through rigorous academic inquiry. The Nuremberg Trials are remembered as a triumph of law over barbarism, a foundational moment for international justice. But justice, even when righteous, is not always clean or straightforward. The execution of the Nazi leaders and the subsequent disposal of their remains reveals the complex moral and practical dilemmas faced by the victors. The Allies sought to bury not just men but memory. Their aim was to ensure that no shrine could rise from the ashes, that no ideology could cling to bone or stone, thereby preventing the creation of new symbols for a defeated yet still dangerous movement. This was a deliberate act of historical control, an attempt to shape the future by erasing the past's physical remnants. And in doing so, they erased the condemned so thoroughly that even history struggled to remember where the trail ended. The meticulousness of Operation Phantom created a unique challenge for documentation and archiving, forcing future generations to reconstruct events from fragmented and often misleading sources. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps, in the end, the final victory was not vengeance, but the deliberate act of forgetting, or rather, preventing a certain kind of remembering. For historians, students, and researchers, understanding Operation Phantom is crucial. It highlights the power of documentation, both its presence and its deliberate absence, in shaping historical narratives and controlling collective memory. It reminds us that history is not just about what is recorded, but also about what is deliberately obscured. If this story moved you, and you value the meticulous work of uncovering obscured historical truths, please share it. Subscribe to History Unburied for more unseen chapters of history, where we delve into the archives and bring forgotten narratives to light. Because some stories aren't just forgotten, they were meant to be, and it is our duty to ensure they are remembered. Your support helps us continue this vital work of documentation and preservation for future generations.